Welcome back. We get back to the panel and discuss the political, economic and security issues that shape India's relationship with China. Pranay, if I might come to you, the whole question of Pakistan has been a major source of irritation between India and Pakistan, that India and China, the Chinese nuclear support to Pakistan, arms supplies, a whole range of things. And at the same time today, the Chinese seem to say, look, they're concerned about the sources of terrorism in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Even last few hours, I mean, we've had this major terror incident in Pakistan, then there's trouble in Xinjiang. So now, is there a way you think India and China can think about cooperation on counterterrorism and work together to deal with the situation that challenges both of us, at least in theory?
I think, of course, I mean, sometime or the other they will have to do it. With Pakistan, every single time this issue has come, last time they managed to convince Pervez Musharraf when he was there, who took action in Lal Masjid, and we all know, the fallout of what had happened after that. So I don't know to what extent Pakistani military establishment are in a position to really take on these forces, which are creating problems not for the government in Pakistan alone, but also elsewhere, particularly those who get support. Groups in Xinjiang or in Tibet, if there is a linkage there. So sometime or the other, they will also have to look beyond Pakistan among other regional players here, and India obviously is one of them, which has been a victim, which continues to face a problem on that issue. So there is a scope for the two countries to come and cooperate on that and take it forward.
Yeah. I think if you look at India, China, on the military situation, one is the, in the short term, okay, what are the areas we could cooperate with on the question of terrorism? But if you see the long-term secular trend that is occurring between India and China, the Chinese military spending has dramatically expanded. And as part of China's modernization, it has transformed its military, particularly in the border regions of Tibet. And today, the gap between Indian defense spending and the Chinese defense spending is almost 4 times as large. So this has really changed the nature of the military balance on the border. So given that fact, even if assuming the best possible intentions from the Chinese, I mean, there is a military problem for India, right? That how do you deal with a more powerful Chinese military on your borders? I mean, how do you see this evolving, and what are the options for India?
Well, I think the power differential in the military domain is certainly there, and it is undeniable. It is evident. It is exactly happened for the reasons. Though I'll say that it is not just a function of defense allocations and expenditure, but also about what we have done in terms of border infrastructure, our ability to sort of support and sustain our troops and so on. I think now we have reached a stage where traditional solutions of simply trying to counter the Chinese one-on-one by military build-up, say for instance this whole idea of a mountain corps, which is being talked about. I'm not sure that is the right solution for this. We need to think more about asymmetric ways of
coming from an ex-army officer
and an infantry officer who has served on the sort of line of control, actual control. So is that, and I think primarily we'll have to look at asymmetric methods of countering sort of Chinese preponderance, and many of them will by necessity have to be in the maritime domain. So we'll have to sort of give much more of our strategic attention to building up our relative strengths in the maritime domain, which do exist today. In the Indian Ocean region, the Indian Navy is still more preponderant, has a wider presence and a deeper footprint than the Chinese have. The challenge for us is not just to keep that lead, but to build it and diversify it in ways that will come handy to us in case a crisis erupts or the Chinese feel that they can focus in the eye.
Nalin, you've dealt with the Chinese power, Chinese diplomacy, and how it affects us. Would you agree with the other two? I mean, in terms of, look, is there a way of rethinking our strategy towards China, given the dramatic expansion of Chinese power, both on economic and the military domains?
Look, you obviously have to strengthen your own defense establishment. That is a given. And unfortunately, we've allowed that to drift a little in the last few years. But I think that is something which the gap can be filled rather quickly. But I think you have to also start looking at how the PLA looks at things. When I was ambassador in China, we signed a defense agreement with China, the first one in history, in May 2006. And everybody said, including our then defense minister, that this is, and he told me, he said, I don't think this is going to happen. I said, well, I think we will make it happen. Now, why did the Chinese sign that agreement with us? I think because the PLA has 2 strands of thought, the way I see it. Obviously, there is a broader problem with India, and they will maybe need to undertake some kind of operations against India, for which they are fully prepared, and which in the last 6-7 years in particular, I would say since 2005 in particular, they have built enormous capacity to match capacities which we had, and our capacities have lagged. The second strand of thinking is that we need India as an ally, and I think this should not be discounted. That's what I said to you at the very beginning, that the geopolitical and geo-economic situation is changing. I bring geo-economic all the time, because if you've noticed in the last couple of years, particularly since the 18th Party Congress, development has now become part of their strategic and foreign policy imperative. Now, if you're going to be so dependent on sea lanes of communication, pipelines, which are equally susceptible to damage and destruction, then you have to start looking for allies other than your traditional allies. The problem is today China has no allies, and I think so. We have options. We have to see how best we can use those options. We have a dialogue at the Defence Secretary, Deputy Chief of General Staff level. We have some form of exchange of operations and terrorism operations. I think both sides are beginning to understand each other better, and we have to see how best we can exploit this line of thinking in the PLA.
I think on the one issue that's beginning to emerge, I think Mr. Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. He saw a lot of opportunity for economic engagement. Do you see, is that going to be one of the priorities? Because we're running out of time, but I just wanted to touch on the economic thing briefly.
I think so. For the new government, whichever way you look at it, I think economy, or putting it back on rail or pushing it forward, this will be the stress area, one of the top priorities for the government. Which are the countries that you're going to look for fresh investment, to come in to build up your infrastructure? So I think China obviously is one of the choice that that he will go for.
Srinath, traditionally, the security wallahs and the establishment tended to trump the prospects for economic cooperation with China. Do you see that changing under the new government?
Well, I hope it does, because currently you have a $32 billion trade deficit with China. That deficit is not going to be filled even if we get all kinds of market access that we need in China, which is anyway not forthcoming. The only way to balance out this trade deficit is for us to arrange for capital inflows from China to come into India, which will have to be primarily by way of large-scale infrastructure investment and other things. This government seems to be interested in that, and I hope they will give a lot of priority to that, because that is one very good way of creating a win-win situation for both sides.
So can we walk on two legs, Nalin, as the Chinese say? Can you engage them, cooperate on the economic side, stand up on the security side?
I'll only want to sound a note of caution, as Kautilya would have done. There is low-hanging fruit and there is other fruit. A lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been plucked. You cannot have a situation where purely economic considerations can force aside underlying political and strategic concerns and requirements. And I would only slightly differ with Srinath by saying that you can reduce the deficit with China enormously by not exporting iron ore to the quantity that you are. You can pelletize it and use it yourself in India. Actually, there are many other ways of changing this balance of payment deficit, but the point is the Chinese have to meet you more than halfway, and you have to set your own domestic house in order.
Thank you, Nalin. I think what we've heard from our panel is there are many opportunities for engaging China, but many of the old problems have come back. Some new problems have emerged, for example, on the trade deficit. One way or another, I think China is going to keep us on our toes, and what we do with China is also going to define India's own place in the world and India's own economic growth in the coming years. So I wanted to thank all the members of the panel, and back on Friday, the Wide Angle will be the next episode of the Wide Angle. Please join us then on Friday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.